The process starts here. Massive haul trucks transport the raw iron ore from the terraces deep below.
Inside the steel factory, the journey of wire rods begins with the mining of iron ore, extracted from the earth by these massive machines.
Inside the steel factory, how wire rods are made from iron ore mining, the full process. The journey begins deep within the mine. These colossal trucks transport the raw iron ore.
Here we see the first stage of steel production, as the raw iron ore is fed into the primary crusher to begin the refinement process.
Here we see the crushed iron ore beginning its rapid journey along the conveyor belt towards the blast furnace. The conveyor belt snakes through the hilly terrain, carrying the iron ore towards the processing plant. Using a sophisticated stacker reclaimer, the iron ore is carefully layered into these vast piles. A massive bucket wheel digs deep into the iron ore, beginning the long process of creating steel.
The raw mix of iron ore enters the sintering machine, where powerful burners ignite the surface, beginning the transformation process.
Here we see the sinter mix, where intense heat fuses the iron ore particles together.
In slow motion, the red-hot cakes of sintered ore fall from the conveyor, breaking apart as sparks fly.
Here we see the sintered ore entering the circular cooler. This critical cooling phase reduces the temperature from over...
Inside the steel factory, how wire rods are made from iron ore mining. Full process. Raw materials are hauled to the top by the skip car, ready to be fed into the blast furnace. Once the bell opens, the carefully weighed burden of iron ore and coke drops into the superheated environment below. This cross-section reveals the inferno within. As the coke burns, the iron melts, forming the molten...
This is the heart of the process, the blast furnace, where superheated air is forced through these tuyeres.
As the iron ore reaches the hottest zone, it melts, forming droplets of liquid metal that trickle down through the gaps in the coke bed.
This is the critical stage in the steelmaking process, where the raw iron is channeled towards the converters to be refined into wire rods.
In the full process of making wire rods from iron ore, the molten iron is tapped from the furnace and poured directly into the waiting torpedo car.
To ensure the quality of the wire rods, a sample of the molten iron must be carefully extracted for analysis.
The torpedo car carries the molten iron, fresh from the blast furnace, to begin the process of making wire rods.
The torpedo car slowly rotates, beginning the crucial transfer of molten iron to the massive ladle.
Here at the desulfurization station, the lance injects reagents, causing this vigorous bubbling reaction in the molten iron.
Here we see the slag skimmer in action, clearing the molten surface of impurities, a critical step in the wire rod production process.
The basic oxygen furnace takes the raw materials and, through intense heat, begins the transformation into steel.
Here, the molten iron is poured from the ladle into the converter, creating a spectacular eruption of sparks as the impurities are burned away.
The basic oxygen furnace filled with molten pig iron, is rotated to the vertical position. Then, the oxygen lance is lowered.
The blow process creates intense heat, essential for converting the iron into steel.
To create high-quality wire rods, the temperature of the molten steel must be maintained at exactly 1500 degrees Celsius. Basic oxide furnace begins the critical tapping process, carefully tilting to pour the molten steel into the ladle while the slag remains behind.
To achieve the desired properties, carefully measured alloys are added to the molten stream, creating this spectacular shower of sparks.
As the argon is injected, the molten steel begins to bubble gently. This refining process is crucial.
The thermocouple provides an instantaneous digital reading, vital for process control and ensuring the quality of the steel.
The molten steel is now carefully transferred to the continuous caster, the next step in creating high-quality wire rods. Here we see the massive turret positioning the steel ladle directly over the tundish. This critical step ensures a continuous flow of molten steel.
Here we see the molten steel flowing through the shroud tube into the tundish, a critical step in the wire rod production process.
Here, the refined iron is cast into billets, the first step towards creating wire rods.
The mold oscillates rapidly, allowing the flux powder to melt into a lubricating slag, preventing the molten steel from sticking.
This is the heart of the process, the continuous caster. Here, the liquid steel begins its transformation into a solid billet.
The molten steel emerging from the molds is immediately hit by high-pressure water sprays, beginning the solidification process.
The red-hot steel strand is pulled flat by massive straightening rollers before hitting the run-out table.
The massive steel billet, still glowing from the furnace, receives its identification stamp, a critical step in the wire rod production process.
This is the walking beam furnace. Here, the steel is superheated by the flames, reaching temperatures exceeding 1200.
Blindingly hot, the billet emerges onto the roller table, ready for the next stage of forming. The journey begins as the superheated steel billet enters the first stand of the rolling mill. Here, immense pressure reshapes the metal.
Inside the steel factory, the red-hot bar speeds through the rolling stands, rapidly becoming longer.
At high velocity, the flying shear snaps shut, instantaneously shearing the head off the moving steel bar. The scrap piece is quickly discarded. Here in the intermediate mill, the searing hot billet is rapidly elongated as it passes through the reduction rollers. The looper arm rises to create a small arch in the steel bar, controlling the tension between the stands.
After being superheated, the wire rod must be precisely cooled. As the glowing steel passes through the water boxes, massive amounts of steam are generated. This is the heart of the process, the finishing block, where the raw material is transformed into high-quality wire rod at incredible speeds.
Here, the carbide rolls spin at phenomenal speed, reducing the diameter of the glowing wire rod to its final size.
The wire rod, still glowing hot from the furnace, exits the finishing mill at speeds exceeding 100 meters per second. Here on the cooling conveyor, powerful fans blow air up through the loops, rapidly reducing the temperature of the newly formed wire rods. The wire rod rapidly changes color from bright orange to dull gray as it travels down the cooling line. The wire rod, still glowing from the furnace, spirals rapidly into the reforming tub, where it is quenched with water and formed into a coil. A coil forming station transfers the finished bundle of the wire rod to the exit hook conveyor. Inside the steel factory. Inside the steel factory, the compactor machine uses immense force to bind the loose wire rods, finalizing the shape before they cool.
As we see here, the wire rods are immediately coiled and then secured by this high-speed automatic strapping machine.
Inside the steel factory, how wire rods are made from iron ore mining. The full process.
The next step is the grinding process, where the wire rod sample is smoothed to a mirror finish for inspection.
This is the microstructure of the finished wire rod. The dark lamellae are perlite, surrounded by the brighter, blockier structures of ferrite.
The forklift engages the wire rod coil, ready for transport to the next stage of the process.
The sheer scale of this warehouse is breathtaking. Thousands of tons of wire rod, organized.
Once cooled, the wire rods are bundled and loaded for transport, the weight immediately testing the truck's capacity.
Once the wire rods are formed, they must be securely fastened for transport. The driver ensures the load is completely secure before leaving the factory floor.
The finished wire rods are now ready for transport, heading out the main gate to customers worldwide.
Welcome to Inside the Steel Factory.
From the furnace to the finalizing mill, these wire rods represent the full cycle of steel production, now ready for shipping.
Bring it down easy now. Watch the gap on the left. Okay, hold it right there. Disengage the chains.
After the rigorous cooling process, the wire rods are ready for shipment, embarking on their journey across the open sea. Inside the steel factory, how wire rods are made from iron ore mining. Full process. The wire rod, still glowing from the rolling mill, is fed into the winding machine at high speed. The automated process
is the blast furnace, the fiery heart of the steel factory, where we begin the process of turning raw iron ore into wire rods. Sophisticated sensors track the cooling process, ensuring the structural integrity of the final wire rod. Inside the steel factory, how wire rods are made from iron ore mining, the full process. How wire rods are made, starting with the transport of iron ore deep inside the steel factory.
Glowing like a city, This massive complex transforms raw iron ore into the wire rods that form the backbone of our infrastructure. Inside the steel factory, the wire rods are made. This is the full process, from the initial iron ore mining to the finished product.
The process starts here, mining the raw ore. Then, the intense heat of the blast furnace purifies the metal.
Here, at the blast furnace, the iron ore is melted at extreme temperatures before being cast into wire rods. The molten iron ore is transformed into this perfect coil of wire rod, showcasing the precision of the modern steelmaking process.